Welcome to another video from Dr. Lock. I thought what we'll do is we'll have a look at some Tibbe locks. I had them sitting around on the bench here, so I thought it'd be a good idea to actually go through and talk Tibbe. So what we have here is we have an ignition and we have a boot lock or a door lock. Now this particular type of system was used on Ford cars. It was also used on Jaguar, but the Jaguar keys are slightly longer. They have an extra cut. So what we're talking about today is just the Ford ones, but the Jaguar ones are very similar. So first of all, we'll just go over what is actually happening with the key. So as you can see, the key here, it's kind of a diamond shape like that, and it has cuts on it. Now these particular keys are really easy to decode. There's six cuts on the key, and sometimes one cut is, well, all the time, you'll have a one here or there, and a one cut is actually a no cut. So to identify this type of key, it's not as to read it, it's not as hard as you might think. When you look at the key on the side here, what you're actually looking for is the cuts which are on these angles here. So I'll zoom in so you can see a little bit clearer. Okay, so that's probably about the best we can do. So to decode this here, we only really need to look for two types of cuts. The other cuts will be completely obvious. The first cut we look for is the 2 and the 3. The 1 cut and the 4 cut are very straightforward. For a 1 cut, it's actually a no cut. So if I look at my key here, if I can get you a good angle here, I can see that this one right here is a no cut, and there's no cut here, so that would be a 1 cut. Now the next cut we want to identify is the 4 cut, which is the deepest cut. Now the deepest cut actually goes right down to this side line right here. So if we do a little diagram here, your 4 cuts go right down to the line, so that's a 4, that's a 4, and your 1 cuts are a no cut at all. So we've already got two of the main cuts decoded. From there, we only need to identify our 3s and our 2s and 3s. Now a 2 cut is a cut, but it's closer to the top, and a 3 cut is almost down on the line. So when you look at this, you say it's almost down on the line, that's a 3. You say that cut's closer to the top, that's a 2. So when we look at this, we could quite easily read it as a 4, 3, 2, 1, 4, 2, for an example. The code series starts with T. A lot of the time you can identify, get a number off the barrel sometimes, or off a door lock. Does this one have one? And what you're looking for is a stamped in number, but unfortunately these ones don't have it. These numbers here which protrude are not the ones you're looking for, not the one you're looking for. You're looking for something that's stamped in similar to that one there that you can't see, but we don't have a code for that. So now we know a little bit more about the key. We can go through and start to decode, pick and make a key. Now to cut the key, I have my HPC cradle here, which consists of a cradle, a spacer, a card, some instructions. Oh look, they even give you a little notebook, never used that in my life, and a cutter. There's the cutter there. So I'll actually set that up at the end of this video, and we'll cut a key code and we'll test it in the lock. This lock here came off a stolen and recovered vehicle, so I mean they've actually put a screwdriver through that and everything's turning, so that's complete rubbish there. All we've really got is a door lock here, so let's put that aside. A couple of different ways of unlocking a door lock. Here's what we call a Tibbe pick. So it has a pin along the side here. You remove this. Actually, I'm going to leave that in to insert it in the lock. So we insert it into the lock. From there, what we want to do is rotate these little parts here until we feel the little drop-ins. Now we don't tell you how to pick locks. Most locksmiths who have this tool can actually use it. Some use it quicker than others. I haven't spent a lot of time using it, and I don't have a cradle, so I'm not going to go through and try and pick it. I can do, but I'm not going to. So that's one method. Once you've got that decoded, all your little parts here are all going to be all over the place, but that's good because that will actually allow you to read it. So you turn it side on and you can read where your 4s are, read where your 2s are, turn it back, and then you should be able to get out of the lock. Now take note, if you put in an ignition, it can be extremely hard to get out of the lock, so try and use it on a door lock, not on an ignition lock, if at all possible. So that's the Ford pick. That's at least you make one too. It's basically a pick and a decoder all in one. Then we move on to this one. We did do a video on this. This is the 6-cut Tibbe tool. So with a Tibbe lock, you can put any key into it and actually make the car lock, as you see. But when you try and turn it anti-clockwise, you can't turn it. So if you go up to a Ford Tibbe car and you put the wrong key and you turn it, you can lock it. we won't be able to unlock it. Now this tool does work on a number of cars. I'm not sure if it's going to work for us today. It's very hard to get back in. And there we go, first go. Just opened it to the left. First go. So I can lock it. And will it work again? Yep, and it's unlocked. So this little tool I love. I'm not going to tell you where to get them. Most locksmiths will be able to get them unless you make one as well. But yeah, very fast, very quick method of getting into it. That's on one of our other videos. Okay, so there's the lock there. Now, if we want to make a key for this particular lock and we don't have one of these decoding tools, we don't have a code, we can't look it up, there are other ways of pulling apart the lock. The ignition lock's quite an easy lock to pull apart. The circlip's a little bit easier than some of these tail locks, because some of these have little roll pins in them, which are a little bit harder. So ignition is a preferred one to get out. Now, if you are trying to pick the ignition out, there is a special tool. There's two of these tools, and they're made by Solber tools. I've got one of their other tools too. So they've got a clockwise and anti-clockwise one. So this one is probably for the ignition, and I'll just test. So this is clockwise. We want to go anti-clockwise to unlock. So this tool wouldn't actually work on this door lock. It'd work on the ignition button. So this tool is basically a cut down version of a Tibbe key, but it's got a few little readers and a few little depths marked along the blade here. It does come with instructions how to pick and how to decode, and comes with a little ring as well, so you put that around your ignition like so. You put your tool in and you can gauge up what the cuts are that way. So pick and decode, I have used this tool before, it did work, and it was not too hard to use. You basically put it in and you rotate the discs, move it backwards, forwards, rotating, and you can actually get the lock open that way. Okay, so that's that tool there. That's just the instructions for the HPC 1200 HPC 1200 Tibbe adapter that we're going to be using in a second to cut a key for this. Now, as I was getting back to my other point, these you can actually read. There is a notches on the actual discs. The way they work is kind of a little bit similar to alloy. You've got rotating discs in there and a sidebar. When they all line up, it allows it to turn. They're not as high security and they're nowhere near the same as a alloy system. Then definitely not as secure. I mean, if we had one of these little tools for alloy, I would be very happy, but we don't. You see those little grooves in there on the side? I'll hold it right there. They've actually got little notches on them, and you can read the actual cut by those notches. Okay, so what I'm doing here is I'm making a card. I've already made one, but it's not exactly right, so I'm just going to transfer this over to this card here. So I've just printed up a card, as you can see, and I'm using the reverse side of it, and I'm just going to use this for all my spacings, so that way I get it exactly right. This is for the Silker adapter. The reason I'm using the Silker adapter now is because we had a lot of troubles with the HPC adapter. I spent the last good hour trying to get it right with no success. I'll put them on the bench and I'll give you a look at both of them. Now, this Silker adapter, I've used this, used to use it 20 years ago every day, all day, and I cut a key perfectly each and every time. But for some reason, my HPC one that I lashed out and bought brand new, still in the box, really just doesn't work. Now, I've taken off the screen off the HPC to do this, and you have to do this very carefully because you don't want to bend these nipples at all. These indicators. So I've already got the spacing here, but it's not exactly right. The card moves around, as you can see, left and right. So where I've lined it up from, I'm just going to replot it, remark it, and then cut the key for the lock that we've been talking about. Okay, so now I have a card, and I can reuse this card each and every time. So now it's time to actually cut a key. So I'm going to put my screen back on, and we're going to cut a key. If I can find my screen. Where's my screen? Up here. Okay, I'm happy with that card. Okay, so here we have our lock, our door lock. Now to read the cuts, these little marks along the side of the discs here, a 1 is a 1, a 2 is a 2, a 3 is a 3, a no cut is a 4. So the only one that's hard is a 4. 1 is a 1, 2 is a 2, 3 is a 3, nothing is a 4. So let's cut this now. So I've got my jig on, I've got that in there, I'm going to load the key. I'm going to put these 2 jigs on the bench too, to show you. Okay, so I'm just tightening up my key. Alright, now our code is 331123. Let's start off here, go to our first one. So here's our markings on the side here. With this it's quite easy to identify. I've got 4, 3, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. So our first one is a 3. So I find my 4, I notch it down. That's a 3. Spin it around, sorry, spin it all the way to the bottom, which is a 4, go up 1, 3 again. Okay, now I spin it 180 to the 4 position, move it up 1 to find the 3. Go to the 4, bring it up 1, which is a 3. Okay, let's just have a quick look and see if we're on track here. So there's our 3 cut there, which is good. It's still got this center piece on top and it's not gone all the way down. It does look a little bit deep, so I'm going to keep that in mind when I do my next cuts. Okay, so let's move over to position 2, which is another 3, and I'm going to back it off just before the line. 3, 3, 3. Now the next one is no marking on the disc, so that's going to be a 4. Going to spin a 180 to the 4th position. So each cut you have to cut 4 times. Already did that one. Already did that one too. So that's our 4, 4, and the last remaining 2 cuts is a 2 and a 3. Let's go to the 2. One part. 2. And another 2. And the lucky last is a 3. So now our key is cut, so I can take it out. Now it's important you check your key. See this flat surface right down the middle of the key? It needs to have that. If it doesn't, you have to run a file over the top to make sure that there's that flat surface and that the cuts haven't cut into that little flat along the top. If there's no little flat, you're going to put it in the ignition, it's going to get jammed, and that's a very unpleasant experience. Now I can just look at my cuts, 3, 3, 4, 4, 2, 3. So they actually look good. Here's our lock here, here's the moment of truth. If we turn it clockwise, it'll lock. Going. If we turn it clockwise, it'll locks. If we turn it anti-clockwise, it'll unlock. And it does. And it works on both sides, so we try it from both sides there. Okay, so I'm happy with that. And that's a key cut to code for the Ford Tibbe, and we made it off the lock. There was no number, so we couldn't make it from the actual code. If there was, it would start with a T and then have 4 digits after it. Okay, so we're back on the bench. Let's do a side-by-side comparison of these two tools. I'm a little bit upset because HPC is normally one of my favourite tools, but today it's not. So this is the part number for it here, HPC Tibbe CMB. Now this kit wasn't cheap. I paid about $800 for it, and to date I haven't really used it. Maybe I've cut 1, 2, 3 or 4 or 5 keys on it, but I went to use it today and I'm having the same problems I've always had with it. I took a couple of hours to try and line it up and find out what was going on, but what I was finding is that my cuts, and if I can show you here, my cuts were off-centered. I'll do the close-up in a second. So my cuts were off-centered when they shouldn't have been. Here's the cradle right here. I read the instructions, lined it up. Now the lines are for the Ford and the circles are for the Tibbe, and there's 2 markings there. Now I followed all those instructions and I was still getting a really badly cut key. So that's your HPC kit right there. You get your card, you get a key, you get a spacer, you get your cradle, and then in here you get a cutter, a spacer, and a couple of Allen keys. Now this one here I got when I purchased a machine, and all I really got was that. So all I need is the washer and a card, which I just produced, so that's not going to be a problem. The difference between these two, and here's the time when we can kind of zoom right in. Okay, that's about the best we can do. So the difference here is that when you've got this in the actual machine and you rotate this one, you can see those numbers quite easily. See that? Nice and easy. When you load it, you just got to find the little grub screw, tighten it up, and away you go. A little bit of surface rust on it too, the bluing's wearing out. Cutter for cutter, I mean, they both take the same sort of cutter, so there's no real difference there. This one here, you actually have to use these lines on the side. So when you're rotating that, it's not as easy to kind of see as the numbers, if you can see what I mean. Let's look at it from the way you'd be looking at it. See that notch? You have to line this notch up with this notch here. So, I mean, you can feel them, but I mean, I tried all different ways and it was just not as easy or nice as the Silka. So when I put them side by side, Silka's my favourite in this example. Now, as far as the keys, now I want to show you what was happening with the HPC, because I did spend a bit of time actually trying to get it right, and I just couldn't. Perhaps it's the jig, perhaps it's my machine, perhaps it's operator error. Could be one or two of the above, but I mean, I have used this one here many years, many times, no problems. Right, so when I'm looking at it, the cuts seem to be offset, so I could say that this middle line should be in the middle here, or perhaps I'm plunging too hard and I'm cutting across the top there. So I'm not really liking that, because this key ends up having to need this center track along here. Needs this center track, this flat spot here, otherwise your ignition will get stuck. So when it starts chopping in like that, the angle might be correct, the depth might be correct, but it means that then I've got to run a file over it and start to really file it down to recreate that flat spot along there, so that when you put it in an ignition, if I put this, there's nothing in this, but when you put it in ignition, you don't want the face cap to get stuck on that, and that's what happens. So here's the key I cut with a Silka, if you can see it. I mean, it looks okay. There's a little bit of a burr there, which is, or a little bit of a different depth there. I think that's because I went too hard on the first cut and my depth marking was a bit too high. My 4s are identical, and they're right down to that line, right down to that little fin on the side. My 3s, I can see them, they're almost there, but they're not quite there. And the 2s are almost like 1s, they're just a slight shaving. And your 1s, of course, are a no cut whatsoever. And just going back over it, because I said it wrong before, but 1 is a 1 cut, 2 is a 2 cut, 3 is a 3 cut, and no cut is a 4. So that's talking Tibbe. And there are other machines out there. You can get adapters for the Silka Futura, you can get adapters for your Silka Matrix and do it with like a laser cutting machine, or you can have a dedicated Tibbe key machine as well. They're coming in quite cheap these days from overseas. So there are different ways and different methods of actually cutting this particular key. I mean, I like the Silka, this jig here, because it means it's one less machine that I need to carry in my car. Just zoom out there and focus. One less machine I need to carry in my car, so it's less weight, it's easier. And the amount of Tibbe these days, there's not really a lot left. I mean, you've got your early model Fords, and then you've got your later models with the transponders, but I haven't really seen any coming out lately. So it could be a bit of a dying keyblade. You know, like a few of the other ones, like the Porsche 928s. They had a funny type of key. You need a special cradle. I only came out with them. In actual fact, that might be my next video, showing you the Porsche 928 keyblades. Okay, so that's Talking Tibbe. If I've messed anything up, please leave it in the description. If you would like to purchase this HPC cradle, leave a comment, because I mean, I've got two of them. I only need one of them, and I don't cut a lot of Tibbe, so no use having two of them. Okay, thanks for watching.